This is Ken Vellante with the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast. And this episode of Something Rather Than Nothing is being recorded on occupied native lands in the state of Oregon, in the city of Albany, that belong to the Kalapuya tribe.
You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Here to welcome Claire Zwicker, teacher, beadwork artist. Claire, glad to welcome you to the program.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much, Aneen. I just wanted to say that I am recording in Te Karanto, which is the Mohawk term for the place where the trees stand in water. And they are the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And I'm actually going to attempt to give my introduction in Anishinaabe Moin. Bizania Wawashkeshkwe Nindijnakas, Wabaneshi Nindodam, and Minjikaning Nindonjaba. So what I said there was, my name is Peaceful Deer Lady. I am of the Martin clan, and I'm from the Minjikaning First Nation, or Williams Treaty Territory. A little bit more about me. As Ken said, I am a teacher, a beadworker. I'm a student actually right now. I'm taking my Master's of Education and Social Justice work at the University of Toronto. Yeah.
Well, Claire, that's where you are now within the program. A lot of times we go back and just try to find out, both, with your interest in education and your interest in art and your beadwork. Can you mention or talk a little bit about what you were like when you were younger and whether you were always interested in art, or is that something that developed over time?
Yeah, so I guess I've always been coloring and drawing and painting like, a lot of children do. But I actually started more out in sports. My parents, when they realized how much energy I had, they actually put me in gymnastics. And I feel like a lot of people don't know this about me right now because it's not really on my social media, but I've been a gymnast since the age of 3, and as early as the age of 9 was in the gym training close to 30 hours a week. So I didn't actually have much time for creating or other things because I would go to school every day and then I would come home, have a snack, and then I would go off to training until like literally 8:30 p.m. at night. And then I would come home and do my homework, eat dinner, and then go to bed, wake up, and do it all over again. So I think sport actually consumed the first half of my youth. And then it wasn't until really high school where I was like, do I only ever want to be doing gymnastics? Like I didn't really get the chance to socialize with my peers because I didn't have time. Like Friday evenings, Saturday mornings, I would be training. So I took a break from gymnastics actually for about 3-4 years. And that's when I really started to explore just other areas, and art was one of them. And I took art all throughout high school. And yeah, that's kind of where my love from art came from, as well as through, I guess, my family too. My grandmother draws, my uncle can draw, and the other side of art, which would be music. I've been surrounded by music my whole life, essentially. My mom is a singer and guitar player. So is my brother. My sister sings and plays piano. And so did my grandfather and my uncle. So I think I have always been surrounded by art, but it's just always taken on different forms, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and It was great to hear about, some of the other background and the energies and
Mm-hmm.
that you had your parents, with your energy said, okay, gymnastics. I was thinking running, gymnastics or running,
Yeah,
for you when
yeah.
when you were younger. Tell us about your work, your beadwork, and how you came to that, and
Mm.
just your practice around that, learning that, developing that
Mm-hmm.
that art.
Yeah, well, it actually has been a very recent journey from me. Just a few years ago, my sister taught me how to bead my first pair of earrings, and it's actually funny because out of my mom, my sister, and my brother, I'm the last one to learn how to bead, and they're younger than me. So yeah, my sister really got me into it because she has been kind of into art and beadwork longer than I have. And then from there, because I'm in university, I have I have access to all these amazing programs through school, and especially programs that are being put on by, Indigenous centers now at universities. So one of my colleagues brought her aunt in to do a beading workshop where we learned how to bead medallions. And when I beaded my first one, it felt so natural to me, and I'm so used to, I guess, exerting energy or finding calmness through sport. But I learned through beading that I could find a kind of like inner peace through creating as well. And it came quite natural to me, right? And this is where we talk about blood memory. Like, what is blood memory? Well, it felt like I had been beading my whole life, because I've been taught that when we're born with all the knowledge of our ancestors. It runs through our blood. So, yeah. So since then, that was when I started my master's, actually. So 2 years ago, I really started to pick up beading more, and then I wanted to share it with more people, and so I put on a beading workshop at school, to teach other Indigenous students, because I just wanted to share what I had known, even if it's just a small amount right now. I don't really call myself an artist or see myself as, a bead worker. It's just something that I do because it brings me joy, it brings me peace, and yeah, that's kind of how I like to look at my work.
Yeah, and I know that. Well, the thing is, now that you're on the podcast and the artist podcast, you're both, yeah, that's that. So
yeah, yeah, you're an artist now.
yeah, that's that does it. Can you and I know that you have a deep love of literature, learning, social justice and connection to your people, and some of the influences as far as your discussion around doing the beadwork. Do you have particular, outside of your family, artistic influences in either of those realms, or artists that really kind of compel you to create?
Yeah, definitely. The first one that comes to mind would be Chief Ladybird, or Nancy King. Chief Ladybird is her art name, but she's actually from the same reserve as I am. And she has quite the following on social media, so I don't think her name will come as a surprise to anybody. But I like her, just the way she views art, in the way that in our culture, we don't, like in Anishinaabe, we don't have a word for art. I think that was, created by Europeans as, something, as a label that we don't really, we don't have a word for it. So she has, when we've talked before about art, she talks about how she creates, and what she creates comes from her heart. It comes from the land. It comes from her ancestors, and it comes from spirit. So that's kind of how I view my art as well, is that I don't ever bead with any intention or plan. I bead what I feel. Whatever I'm feeling that day, or if I'm beading for someone, I bead with their spirit in mind, and and what colors come to me when I think of them. And another artist that has the same kind of philosophy around art is Monique Ora. And I've done some paint workshops through school, and they are really much about the same thing, like not calling themselves an artist, and saying that they are a creator of things, or they're a visual storyteller. And they also taught me a lot about how to let go of perfectionism in creating, because I think that's been a huge barrier for me with why I don't do a lot of painting or drawing anymore, is because I feel like I need to create this perfect image of something, and I take so long to do things, because I have this like pressure to perform that was bred through me basically as a gymnast. So I really appreciate their teachings and letting expectations go, essentially, and just creating for yourself, for your spirit.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned as far as with the sport, and of course with gymnastics, right? I mean, you want to land the 10.0, right? Land the 10.
Yes,
right?
Yes, that was the old system, but it's still the same. Like everything you do, like every tiny thing, they are watching you and they're taking away points. It's not even a positive system that lifts you up. It's like, oh, you had a flexed foot or a bent knee, like we're taking points away from you.
And that's probably been part of the mental thread that you've had to work with on the perfectionism,
yeah,
as you mentioned.
Definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I was wondering, Claire, if you could mention, with the everybody's talking about 2020, very negatively, and I think the history of 2020 is more complicated, with a lot of positive developments amongst the negative as well. But for you as a person, you as an artist, I talked to a lot of artists, and they feel that either there's more pressure, or maybe question like, why am I doing art? Why am I creating things? Where a lot of people asking these type of questions. And for you, what do you think the role of art, pandemic, racial protests, other fractures and changes in society, do you think art has a different role right now, or is it just kind of what you go back to like you have? How does it feel for you?
Honestly, art or beading has been really healing for me in this time. I'm a very anxious person, and I don't like inconsistency. And that is, with the pandemic, things have been very inconsistent. I was, out of a job for a while, and beading was really the only thing I had to keep me sane, because, I was running at the beginning of the pandemic, but I actually broke my ankle. So then I wasn't able to, get my energy out through that way, and that's one of my coping mechanisms. So I turned to beadwork, and I actually created my business during the pandemic, and it's been my only source of income. And I think that it's brought me so many beautiful things. It's brought me like this online community that are beyond my wildest dreams, because before, growing up, and especially on social media, there's all these negative representations and stereotypes of Indigenous peoples. And, in education and social media, I never saw myself or my culture reflected back at me until now, really, until I found this whole universe of, other Indigenous creators online, and it blows me away, the things that are happening, and the resilience, really, all of us continuing our practices and the things that bring us joy and the things that bring us together, and especially in disrupting racism. We all know that with the pandemic, it affects marginalized populations more than non. So, and you see with even the images now, with, I see a lot of Indigenous peoples painting these gorgeous masks, and that, that itself is a representation and a message, to protect our communities, so to protect our people. So in a lot of cases, I see the pandemic bringing, people closer together, even though it's online. And yeah, like you said, it's been up and down. It's been negative and positive. There's been a lot of death. It's been a lot to process, and a lot of people might think oh, well, why are you stressed? You're just at home, doing nothing, essentially. You shouldn't have a care in the world right now. But I think the opposite is true, and that, I am worried for my community, especially my Afro-Indigenous kin, and everything coming up in the media with Black Lives Matter and police violence, and how many, and just realizing how many Indigenous and Black lives we lose on a daily basis. And art is just one of the ways, one of the tools we use to share our voices.
Yeah, and I think that's so well put, as far as the art that's coming out, and it doesn't have to be strictly protest art, but it's fascinating because everybody ends up impacted by large events. Most everybody ends up impacted by large events, and then there's this shifting in adaptation, and it can be fascinating and scary what's depicted. But you had said, as far as with your beading, I mean, sometimes we think of art in the sense of what you produced and what goes into the market and what has value in the market, when for the artist, you doing the beadwork, the therapy and the medicine is there, and there's this other piece to it, but it's just serving different purposes.
Yeah, that's why we have the hashtag beading is medicine. But yeah, I think if you look at art historically, or art relating to Indigenous peoples, we're either non-existent, not present from art. In Canada, we have famous artists like Emily Carr or the Big Seven, who paint these images of Canada as this empty, vast wilderness, and this idea that Indigenous peoples never existed, that Europeans came to this, empty land for settling. And I think I'm seeing a lot now, especially around the topic of land and art and representations of land in art by Indigenous peoples that counter that narrative, that counter that trope that Canada or Turtle Island was a vast emptiness for the taking. And lost my train of thought.
No, I was thinking about the intersectionality in part of. I talked to Jordan Marie Brings Three White Horses, Daniel, a few episodes back, and I told her. I mean, she mentioned during the episode where she was talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, but in a very short order, I began to understand how it was connected to water rights, to fracking, to questions
Yeah.
about land use, to, you know, and all these, it was all collected there. And I didn't see how all that
Right,
happened. And I
right.
followed up with her and said, oh, wait a second, it's this piece, this piece, this piece, and that piece. And
Yeah.
I think that's where it ties deep, deep into the history. And I know you've had, I know you've been involved in some of that work. I got a question here that you might have gotten at, but I don't want to assume your answer.
Mm-hmm.
Who or what made you who you are?
This question is it's difficult because to pin it down to one thing, you know, I can't really, but I would say like it's just been my experiences and, you know, the people that surround me. My mom is a huge influence on me, my family, you know, my brother, my sister, teachers I've had. I would say my most recent teachers, because in my master's, I've been so lucky to work with a number of Indigenous professors, because that was something I didn't have growing up. I didn't have Native teachers. And definitely my community, and I say community and it's such a broad term, but, you know, I think we have many communities, you know, one of mine being the urban Native Indigenous population in Toronto. That's a community to me. And my reserve, like I didn't grow up there, but that's a community to me, and I have deep familial ties there. And a lot of my work stems from my communities and my mom, and you know, I try to carry on the work of my ancestors basically, and I think that is a lot of what makes me who I am. And I think what also makes me who I am is my spirit name, which I mentioned earlier. And it's also my Instagram handle, Peaceful Dear Lady. And
what does that mean to you?
What does that mean to you?
What does that mean to you? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually been a lifelong journey of figuring out what that name means, because it's not like my elder ever, you know, elders, when they tell stories, they don't explain something to you. They tell you a story and you're meant to, you know, interpret it in your own way, essentially. And I was gifted this name when I was about 10 or 12 years old. And at the time, like, we visited my reserve. We went to powwows every year, but I didn't understand the sacredness of this name or the weight that it carried. You know, so it's been a journey of just trying to figure out, like, okay, what does this name mean, and what does this name, you know, mean to me? How am I representing my people, like, through this name? And I think a lot of Native youth struggle with this disconnection, you know, that so many of us have because of colonial policies like the Indian Act. So many of us, like, don't have Native names and don't know, like, how sacred they are. And what these names really are is they actually are represent our purpose in life and our gifts, and that we each bring a gift to the world. We each have a responsibility to our community. Yeah, we all have a role to play. And I see what's happening with a lot of youth, and it's a bit of my history as well, is that for a time I didn't know who I was. I mean, that's obviously a common thing for youth, but it was like in my early 20s where I really was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't, like, know what my purpose is. I felt like so unworthy. Like, I really didn't know what I had to bring to the world. Which, you know, I went down this dark path of suicide, and, you know, that's another common thing in our communities. Native communities. And I think what's missing is our connection, our language, our culture, our traditions, that these are the things that tell us who we are. We're missing these things. And so my name is like everything to me, because when I really realized that what it was, and that it was meant to lead me on my path, I understand now that, okay, I'm meant to be where I am, and I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing. Like, to me, peaceful deer lady, it's just, to me, is to walk in a good way. And I carry the gifts of the deer, which, deer are brave, and deer are giving. They give their whole selves to, their bodies, essentially, for us to live, for people to live. In Indigenous peoples, we use every part of the deer. And so being in a caring position, or a caring field like education, I found myself like giving too much of myself away. And so to me, I have to remember to give some things back to myself, to keep that inner peace, so that I'm able to share that joy with other people.
Yeah, the peaceful part of it too, of being reflexive, not just towards the outside, but peaceful towards yourself, right? Peaceful towards you remaining intact, because you have to, right, in your role.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And just as about identity, in who we are, and naming, right? How important that could be, particularly for cultures or the history where people don't control the language and they control the name, right?
Yes.
So I think that's pivotal. Yeah. Again, thanks for that. You're a big reader and thinker. Prior to getting a couple more scripted questions, what important books do readers have to look at and listen to right now? Stuff that you've encountered recently, authors and thinkers.
Well, the author that started this whole connection between you and I was Leanne Simpson, and her new work, Newcoming, The Cure for White Ladies. I actually haven't read it yet, but I've read some of her other work, and I've met her in person, and I'm going to put her work out into the world and say that I think her work is pivotal for Indigenous peoples to read, because it's that thing that I said. It's like culture being reflected back at you. When she writes with spirit, and she writes using the language. So she uses Anishinaabe Moan with English in her writing. And I think when I read her work, it was the first time that I'd ever felt seen by anything that I've read before. And another one that I've been reading and trying to get through is Alicia Elliott's Mind Spread Out on the Ground. And the reason why I say trying to get through it is because so often I need to put it down and take a breath, because it's so heavy. There's like this realness and heaviness to it about the realities of being an Indigenous person, and not just Indigenous, but a white passing Indigenous person, and how she just is, I think, how she was seen as a young kid, like how other kids didn't really understand her, or she never fit into either group, because she was both Indigenous and white. And a lot of the time throughout my life, like, that's how I felt, like trying to find this, negotiating different spaces. And I think that's really where a lot of Indigenous peoples are trying to come to, like who we are, without having to make sacrifices for other people. Like I don't want to make sacrifices for other people anymore around who I am. And that's kind of what I'm learning through these authors. And yeah, I think.
Yeah, the Leanne Simpson, her, I'm about a quarter of the way through the book, and the energy in her, it's difficult to describe. I mean, there's some books I would say, I literature is my first love, always will be. There's certain writers where, this might sound silly, but what they've written and what they're writing on the page seems barely to be contained in the book. You know what I mean? Like there's just
brilliant description of it. It's alive. Like
it is.
Yeah, the words transcend the page, and that's how I try to write as well, especially in academic spaces. I'm trying to transcend this like idea of what like an academic research paper is, and that also comes through reading just different books or different literature on Indigenous research and Indigenous research methods, and what does it mean to research, and what does it mean to do it in an Indigenous way. And I think that is something that I've learned from, that's come out or been the same in across all of these texts, is that like as Indigenous peoples, we bring like our being to our work. So whether it's like beadwork, drawing, painting, writing, we bring our full selves. And so it's so important that we're well, because if we're not, like if my spirit isn't feeling well, I can't create, I won't bead, or I won't write. And I think that's really hard for non-Indigenous peoples to understand, like especially teachers when they're not understanding of why Indigenous students are late on assignments. Well, first of all, a lot of the stuff we're writing about is personal to us because we write about what's personal. So, and a lot of that has to do with our pain, colonialism and trauma, and just what it takes to read about colonialism and write about colonialism, or just basically re-experiencing trauma through our work and trying to heal through it. I don't know.
That work in I think that's the part of it with art for me, and I've learned a lot from your comments. It's both like in the creation of the art or the experience of an art and what you can do, like when you have to put the book down, being like, super important, this book speaks directly to me, but I am processing trauma and pain, right?
Yes. And because especially the realities of these books are, the realities of our own lives as Indigenous peoples, because we all experience similar trauma.
Well, and I think part of the art, well, again, I know you early on you had mentioned as far as, like the term art or whether that fits, and whatever the term is, for it, it's just this way of getting at that story and narrative. And I think with Simpson's book, like, yes, I'm not going to be able to connect with certain aspects of the immediacy for the culture, but I talk about the deep spirit and humanity of what's being expressed right there is very accessible for everybody. And I think we just end up getting kind of cut into like demographics of, should a 48-year-old white cis male American enjoy this book? Hell yeah. Right. And it doesn't stick out, as much. But I think some of our experiences within reading quite similar. Claire Zwicker, Peaceful Dear Lady, I believe you may have an answer for why is there something rather than nothing?
I feel like I've kind of already touched on this, but yeah, it comes down to, for me, just knowing my place in life and knowing that, you know, I am worthy, or that I have something to give, I have something to share, I have gifts, and that is something. You know, we have voices, we have histories, we have things to share, things to say. Well, It's funny because I've thought a lot about this question, and I do like to have philosophical conversations, and I just think I try to think of it in terms of, you know, our culture, and that, you know, things are alive, and the way we see the world, and that everything's connected. And how would it be possible for there to be nothing when we have all of these, like, billions of connections between organisms in the universe?
Yeah. No, I mean, you got it.
Great.
No, you got it. No, we have the answer in there. It's there. Claire, I was wondering if you could share with the audience ways to connect with you, your work, in any way that you're comfortable with and you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, so they can actually connect with me through my Instagram, which is Peaceful Deer Lady Creations. I don't have a website right now. I'm just selling through my Instagram because I've just started. It's been just a short journey, just a few months. I started at the beginning of the pandemic, like I said. So, and I'm doing all these other things on the side. I'm a teacher, and I'm writing my master's thesis. So, yeah, that's really where I post all of my things, is my Instagram. Or they can email me at claire.zwicker. So Zwicker is ZWICKER 94@gmail.com.
Yeah, and you said Z for the American audience. That is Z.
Right.
I've done that after I've been in England and held on to that word and then said it, and it's like. But I gotta tell you, Claire, it's been great chatting with you and meeting you and just learning about, you know, learning a lot. And I do say that I do this show and I listen closely and I learn a lot. And I just wanted to, you know, mention here at the end, I've appreciated, you know, your thoughts and you as a person, as an artist, and really just wanted to thank you for taking. I know you mentioned all your various things that you're doing. I know you're super busy, but wanted to thank you for, you know, taking the time and sharing with the audience about your art and about yourself.
Yeah, no, it was great chatting with you, Ken, and I'm very thankful for this opportunity. So big Miigwech to you, and I want you to be well.
You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing.